Sure. Thanks, Taylor. Appreciate it, and thanks for everyone for investing some time here. And I will keep it very brief and actionable, and maybe even get you out of here a few minutes early. All right. So the topic today is how to stop getting ghosted after sales calls, and this is something that in my coaching business I get a lot of. I experience it myself from time to time. And so this should be probably very close to your hearts. And by way of background, I've been in the enterprise sales business for a long time, since probably many of you have been born before you were born. And I've gone out about 15 so years ago. I went out on my own and just do sales coaching and consulting to companies that are selling to that are typically small startups and so forth. And now I'm particularly with health tech companies. And so I've got a fair amount of experience in this sort of topic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of dive right in very quickly and make it very specific about how to stop getting ghosted and what the components of it are. And the way to start, the way I like to start is, and this is perhaps the most important component in this entire conversation, is that you really have to not think of yourself as a salesperson as much as you are really a business person. And that's the mindset that you need to have. And you're not really trying to sell anybody anything. And I think what your real job on a sales call or on a presentation is to try and figure out if there's even a fit, if there's an opportunity for the two of you, or the two different parties, or however many parties you have on the call, to work together in a way that's mutually beneficial. You're not doing someone a favor, and they're not doing you a favor by buying. Everyone's looking out for something to where they can get a benefit. And so the questions you want to be asking is at least in your own head, is this something that we can solve, that I can solve on behalf of this customer? Is it valuable enough to matter? And are these the people that can make that decision? And do you want to even work with them? There are situations where you may find that the person or the company that you're dealing with is just not the kind of company you even want to do business with. So these are the sorts of things you want to ascertain. And in order to do that on a sales call or in a series of sales calls, you're entitled to a level of clarity. You're entitled to get some answers to questions. And that's the difference between just being a salesperson is looking to try and sell something versus a consultant or a business person that's trying to figure out if there's an opportunity to solve a problem to the benefit of both people. And so if that's what you're trying to accomplish, then you're entitled to ask some very specific questions. And we'll get to those questions in a minute. And so, this is something I say over and over and over again, but it's really important if you want to have the right mindset when you go into these sales calls. And that is, you're diagnosing a problem and you're trying to figure out if you're capable of solving it, and if you even want to solve it, right? So that's the first thing. So that mindset is going to help you a lot as you go through your sales calls in general. It's going to take pressure off of you to sell. It's going to allow you to ask tougher questions and expect answers. And it's going to allow you it's going to basically telegraph to the other person or the people, whomever your prospects are, that you're serious about this in a way that's not manipulative, that's not sleazy, if you will, and you're really trying to get to some level of truth, and you're trying to get to it together with the other person. So that said, the first thing to know is, what's the problem? And that is, why do you get ghosted? And there are basically three reasons why it happens. You're vague in what your offer is, or what the next steps are, or what the benefit is, or all of those things. And that is, if you're not really covering the problem and addressing the problem that the customer has expressed, or there isn't a problem, or it's not understandable, then it's an ambiguous situation, and it's very likely that that's not going to move forward, and you're going to end up getting hung up, and then we know what happens then. The second is there's a lack of urgency, right? And that is, there's no real compelling reason. And you want to know whether or not there's a compelling reason, because if there's not a compelling reason, then why move forward with it? If there's really no willingness to deal with the pain, or the pain isn't great enough, their chances are quite good that they're just going to continue to exist in the situation they're in now. And you want to figure that out as quickly as possible. And then finally, you may be talking to the wrong person, or there isn't anybody that owns the problem. And that's another thing you want to get to the bottom of. Are you talking to the right person? Who owns this problem? How big a problem is it? Et cetera, et cetera. Those sorts of things. So when you go through these calls, calls in the future, you want to figure out whether or not these things are coming up, right? And if it's ambiguity, for example, I mean, you're going to want to improve your presentation and the questions you ask and the answers that you provide, so that you're addressing that and you're eliminating ambiguity. That's an awfully big word for me on a Tuesday. So here are some of the questions that you're entitled to ask, right? And the operative word here is you're entitled. Again, going back to the fact that you're a business person, this is you have the right to ask certain questions. Now, you may not want to ask them. Timing is very important. You don't necessarily ask them in the first couple of minutes, and that's a whole other presentation about sales process and how to start a call and do discovery and how to wrap up a call. But ostensibly, or for purposes of this conversation, these are questions you're going to want to get to toward the end of the call at a minimum. Right? Some of them you're going to learn in the course of the conversation. They're going to come up in discovery and so forth. But they're in these. And this is a question. We'll start with this one. I love asking toward the end of the call, after you've gotten some level of discovery. So what do you like? What don't you like? And that question begs a response. It's not, you can't answer yes or no. You have to give them a response. They have to give you a response. And you're going to learn a lot about how serious they are or how important this is based upon how they answer that question. You want to know also who makes the decisions, or another way of asking is how do you guys go about deciding something like this? What's the process you go through? And then another one is who else is involved? Who are you who else is involved in this? Who else is impacted by this? And this kind of helps you to understand, like, qualifying who else needs who whether or not you're talking to the right person, whether or not you're able to surface all the interests or problems or obstacles or what have you involved in the sale. Another question is you certainly want to be able to know is timing. What's like, when do you need to get this done? Like, how important is this? Like, what is there a particular deadline you need to hit? And that's going to tell you a lot about how important this is. The next one is, I sort of touched on this, but how big is the pain? How much does this matter to you guys? I mean, do you know what it costs you? Do you know how difficult it is to fix this, et cetera, et cetera? That, like, something along those lines will tell you about whether or not you've got a qualified opportunity. And then finally, what happens if you don't do anything? How you ask these questions matters, but that's another one. Like, why even do this? And if you can get answers to those questions, what you're going to be able to do is qualify that opportunity, right? And then that's going to allow you to do the next thing, which is to figure out where to take this call. And by the way, these sorts of questions, these are the standard qualifying questions. So if you get to the end of the call and you're able to get good answers to these things, now you know from a forecasting standpoint whether or not you've got something that's live and has real potential and worth investing your time in, or if it's something where you've got someone who's kicking tires or they're not in a position to make a decision. Okay. I have a note here about asking about budget. And basically the idea of, like, do you have a budget for this is the kind of question that gets people on edge. And I think if you rather than use the word budget, it just seems to me this is sort of one of those dirty words. Unless they bring it up, uh, uh, it's probably better to ask these other questions, and from that you can arrive at a budget, or more important than a budget, you can arrive at what the likelihood is that you can deliver enough value that you can charge what you're worth, right? So, how cute is the pain, or how big is the opportunity? Like, how much is this costing you every week? And if it's costing them $1 million a week, then you know that you can probably charge them $100,000 a week, or something like that, right? So now that you know that you have these sorts of questions, now you're in a position where you can do one of four things. So based on what you've learned, right, and those questions will really help you learn whether or not whether you know what to do and what not to do. Next, you either there's an opportunity to advance the call, right? If there's huge enthusiasm and they're willing to, and they're expressing curiosity, and there's a clear purpose and those sorts of things, then you know what to do. It's like, let's get that. What's the next conversation? How do we move forward? What's the right thing to do to move forward? Let's get that going. The other is, timing's not right, or, they're a year out, right? Then what you might do is park it. You might say, hey, listen, this sounds good. Sounds like we have reason to talk further, but you're quite a ways out. So I'll set a point to check in with you in 6 months, and then put it in your tickler file or put it on your CRM to reach back out with them from time to time, however often you need, to just stay in front of them and maybe catch up. But effectively, you're going to park that call. The next is you change it. You either move the conversation to something else. You try and find someone else inside the organization. If there is an opportunity, but you're talking to the wrong person, then you want to find that different stakeholder. Who else is involved is a very important question, and can really tell you whether or not you're talking to the right person. You might be able to find a different opportunity in there in the course of your discovery that, I can't help them with this, but I can help them with that. And then that may basically kicks off a new sales process. And then the other is acknowledge that there's not a fit. An exit. Hey, we can't help you. And you should look at this as a gift. And that is, if you've talked to someone and they're not a fit, then you've basically qualified them, and you can move on. And I mean, the one thing you might be able to do is say, hey, I can't help you with this, but I know someone who can. And let me route you to, I'll introduce the two of you, and you might generate some goodwill, and they may think of you in the future, and they may recommend you to somebody else now that they've know what you do. They may recommend you, and you may get a warm introduction out of it. So those are the four things: advance, park, change, exit, right? And by the way, if you want the slides, just email me, and I'm happy to send them along. So then what I choose to do is I want to allow myself enough time at the end of the conversation to ask the sorts of questions that matter. Like, hey, what do you like? What didn't you like? And who else is involved, and so forth? And what do we do from here? And that turns into what I call a 2-minute wrap up. And that is, I want to say, hey, based on what I'm hearing, what we've discussed, this is what I'm hearing. Am I on track? What do you think? And then what I would do is I'd say, how do we move forward? What would you recommend? Or the other option is, if you've been doing this a little bit and you know what you're doing, you might say, here's what we typically do. We set up this call with your IT department and talk to them about APIs and security and all that nonsense. And at the same time, we want to talk to somebody on your product side because blah, 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 right? And so you dictate what the next steps are, right? And then measure based upon their reaction, kind of reassess all along the way whether or not there's a real opportunity. And if there is, how do you just determine the decision process and what happens next? One good question that I love to ask is, how do we know if this is going to be successful? how do you measure the success of this? What would you like to accomplish in the next meeting? Those sorts of things. That's another good way to kind of measure the level of enthusiasm. Are there next step output that from company, like what things do you arrive at as a result of this, right? That you can then reiterate and reinforce the need for the next meeting. Who needs to be there? Obvious. And then who owns this? Who else needs to be involved? Like who's going to take charge of this? Or, or who should be working with, or who do we lead this from your side? It's going to be me from our side, et cetera, et cetera. And then book the meeting, right? Simple. So from there, as I said at the start of this, our goal is to get from, hey, we've got this right mindset, to here's a plan of action. And, and what I want to invite you to do is, if you've got a particular scenario that you'd like to tackle, or you want to brainstorm together and we can discuss it now, happy to do so. And we can keep it high level and non-confidential, or so that you don't have to share any specific company details. And we can go over it, or I can answer any questions you might have, and we can talk through a potential sales scenario if you want. And remember, the thing I like to say here again at the end is, if you can't get clarity on all this stuff, if you can't get clarity on what's the process, the timing, the stakeholders, who else, and what should happen next, you really can't forecast. And as an advisor, as a consultant, as a business person, you're entitled to know this, right? And if you're not getting the answers, you should have the confidence to be able to walk away if there's not a fit, or if you can't determine a fit, or you're talking to the wrong person. And then the next strategy is to figure out if there is an opportunity, but you're talking to the wrong people. How do I get to the right person? And before so, one of the things I asked you before at the start of this is, how often do you end a call with a scheduled next step? How often does it happen? Rate yourself 1 to 5. If it's below 4, this will help. If it's 4 and above, you're probably doing a lot of this stuff, or you're just really lucky. And then one of the questions I often coach people on is, how do you need to know? What is it that you need to know for your sake that this is something you can do? Like, who's your ideal customer? What's the likelihood that they fit into that bucket? What sorts of things you absolutely need to know? And that question, by the way, leads into a whole conversation around sales journey, and that's a whole nother powerful way to kind of move things along. So you're invariably, just to wrap up before we get into quick Q&A, invariably you're going to run into situations where you do get ghosted. And I couldn't end this without sharing you one last thing. And this is, they call this the magic email. And this is courtesy of Blair Enns. And I don't know if he cooked it up, but he's certainly made it famous. But it's and you should write this down or send me for the slides, but you're going to get ghosted at some point. And at some point, you're going to want to write this. You're going to say, I haven't heard back from you on whatever, so I'm going to assume you've gone in a different direction, or your priorities have changed. Let me know if I can be of assistance in the future. Regards. And then sign it, and that's it. And then stop, right? And what happens oftentimes is someone will write you back. And they go, oh, no, I've just been buried. Or I'm sorry, we had a reorg and blah, 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 or whatever. And in some cases, you're not going to hear anything. And all of those answers are gifts, right? Because ultimately what this stuff, when you get ghosted, it just eats away at you, your psyche and your sense of worth, and it shouldn't. And this is one way to alleviate that. And I just find that this is a very useful, I've been using a variation on this for years, and Blair just took it and he cleaned it up and made it even more crisp and simple. And so this is a really good way to address that and get this off. Move it out of your qualified lead list, or move it up the qualified lead list, or in your forecast if they do in fact respond in a favorable way. So with that, it's Q&A, and then I've also got my contact information. And by way of we'll kick this off the Q&A, but just by way of background, you can connect with me on LinkedIn happily. You can read if you want to reach me. There's my email. And then I do this thing where I do sales call tune-ups for customers. And you send me a video of your call, and then I review it, and then I go over it with you, and then give you tips, and help you streamline and make your sales call more effective, preventing ghosting. And this kind of process is part of it. But if that's something of interest, that's the link, or you can just email me. All right. So with that, are there questions? And I'm gonna.
Thank you so much, Brendan. This was awesome. I will suggest everybody put your questions and queue them up in the chat. I've seen a lot of chat going on, and also was notified that I didn't have the ability, or I didn't allow people to copy and paste out of the chat. So I've changed my settings for next time, and we'll send you all out the chat file so you can have everybody's LinkedIn. But in the meantime, if you want to write any questions down in the chat, that would be great. While you're doing that, my question, Brendan, was around, I think at the beginning of the presentation, you shared why people often will ghost you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, or go into a little more depth about what you've seen as kind of the most frequent mistakes on that front as to why I'm getting ghosted, and what suggestions do you have around
Sure.
those reasons?
Yeah. I have a little talk that I do, and a kind of worksheet that's around the sales process and how to start a sales call, the middle of the sales call, the end of the sales call. And this ghosting piece is a big chunk of the end of the sales call. But if the one clear mistake that I think a lot of salespeople make, and this is why I try and ask them, tell them, try not to be a salesperson. Don't think of yourself as a salesperson. Think of yourself as a consultant, as an advisor to them. And if you start to put that hat on, you can address the very problem that keeps coming up that I see over and over again. And that is, you start the conversation and then start selling. And in a lot of cases, especially first calls and early calls, or calls where you're meeting some people in the process for the first time, you start in with the solution. And that is doubly bad for a couple reasons. One is, I guess that's redundant if something's doubly bad for a couple of reasons. So is that square? That's squared. The
That's
problem is
four, I think.
squared.
Yeah.
So I'll come up with four. You wait. So 4 reasons. So first of all, you alienate people by just starting in and talking. Because what people want to do is they want to talk. They want to tell you what matters to them, and what you want to do is invite that conversation. It can be a little put you on. It can make you uncomfortable in the beginning because you no longer have control of where it's going to go, where the conversation might go, and so forth. And with some practice, you can get better at kind of keeping things on track. But by allowing the customer to talk, or customers to explain what it is that they are trying to accomplish, it allows them to feel like, A, they're being heard and they get to express themselves. B, you get to hear what their priorities are. And so now you're much more inclined to talk to the things that matter to them, as opposed to the things that you think are important. Because it doesn't matter what features your solution has in it if those aren't the features that matter to the customer. And it may very well be that you've got 20 or 30 different features, and they're only interested in 2. And if you're not spending time on the ones that matter to them, then you're out of touch with them. The other reason why it's good to get the conversation shifted to them and let them talk is what they end up doing. It buys you time to think and get a feel for the kind of conversation that's going to take place. Because the people on the call, if it's more than one, you're going to start to get a chance to understand the dynamic that goes on. Like, is it one person that's doing all the talking and asking all the questions, or are they competing with each other, and so forth? So, if I were to just say one thing, it's try not to sell early in the sales call, as counterintuitive as that may seem.
Yeah, that's good advice. We've got three good questions in the chat, Brendan.
Sure.
Let's kick it off with Sean and then move down the list to Nathan and Paul. And Sean, Nathan, and Paul, if you want to come off mute and provide context to your question, feel free.
So in the case of different problem, you're talking to the right people. In the case of a different stakeholder, I'm assuming somebody on the call is saying, oh, you should go talk to Charlie. And that's often, to me, one of those polite yes, true no's.
Well, it could be. Just in a nutshell, I mean, chances are they're not going to offer that up, right? They're not going to volunteer that it's not them because people don't want to admit that they're not in charge, right? Or in a lot of cases, they're going to say if they set the appointment and you qualify them, and you find out they're not really the right person, you're going to want to figure out how you're going to have to get to that. Like it sounds to me like you're involved, but there's somebody else that ultimately decides this. Who decides this? Like who actually signs off on this? That's a hard question to dodge completely. And if they dodge it completely, then you've got some work to do. And that's when the salespersonship has to really kick in, because now you're in a situation where you've got to figure out, oh, there is an opportunity, but I'm gonna have some obstacles here. And people oftentimes don't want to keep you. They want to keep you from their boss, who is the person that makes the decision, because the boss has told them to, or what have you. But at some point, you're going to have to figure out how to make it to that person and understand how, what their criteria are. And that's actually a subject for a whole nother conversation. But yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Thanks. Nathan, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So, Brendan, great presentation. I'm loving it so far.
Just so far.
Well, we're getting to some really good meaty questions, I think. So let's get into it. I'm a business attorney. I represent a lot of founders. And one of the questions that I have, or one of the things that I see, an observation is usually you'll have a lot of SDRs, right?
Yep.
Who know this really well, who work on the prospecting stage and everything and lead it up to someone who comes in and closes deals.
Yeah.
This is great. But what is interesting to me and what my question is related to sort of the deal makers, the people that I interact with, the founders, the ones who are going in to do a capital raise or to go do like a mergers and acquisitions deal.
Yep.
And you follow these same principles right, in these phone calls, where you're going to look at indications of interest in the party who you're raising money from or who you might sell your company to.
Yep.
And you've got to go through the same thing. What's interesting is how horrible us top-level executives are at doing those calls and how great this training is. And it's just interesting to me. I see a lot of humility and a lot of ability to take rejection on the SDR level, right?
Yeah.
But I don't see that in sort of the higher ego level.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So I'm just curious, what do you find that to be the case? Do you find that these principles translate to those deal-making type calls?
Yeah. Yes. The one thing that the first thing the SDRs have as an advantage over senior execs inside a company is they get lots of opportunities to get rejected. And so so what happens is they get better at understanding the patterns of rejection or the patterns of ambiguity that they can resolve. So what happens is, SDRs are on the phone, they talk to a bunch of people, they have a lot of conversations, and they get to the point where they know, oh, this is what I need to talk about. They either get good or they get fired, but they get lots of touches. And the other thing about the senior execs is they put a tremendous amount of value and importance on any given transaction because they don't have that many of them. And so they clench they hold on to the deal. Whereas SDR is like, oh, I'm going to have another phone call. I'll do it again. I'll try again. Totally. And so one of the things you teach senior execs is to get them in the habit of understanding that, oh, you got to be able to walk away. As soon as you can feel like you feel like, oh, I can walk away from this deal, then you're in a much better position to think about it more rationally and that's where an attorney can come in, because you don't have a dog in the fight in the same way, right? So your legal advisor can code you and say, well, listen, you're a little bit removed from the situation, so you don't, it's not as critical to you. You want the company to succeed, but you can also kind of step away. And that's why in some cases you're probably a really good advisor in those situations, because you don't have the dog in the fight.
Well, one thing I would follow up on that. First of all, fantastic, phenomenal answer, and I totally agree with you 100%. But I'm going to push back and say sometimes they walk away too soon, but more out of an ego issue where they're like, "What? You don't want this deal? This is like the best deal that'll ever happen for you. Okay, fine, we're out of here." So they have to watch that side too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, thanks for your answer. Great, great presentation.
Do we have time for another one, Taylor?
Yes, sir. Let's make this one the last one. Paul, if you want to jump off mute and share some context for your question.
Sure, and I'll go super quick because I have a tendency to ramble. So, Brendan, great stuff.
Are you Australian? Oh, clearly.
Absolutely not. Lived in Australia a long time, but absolutely not. Far too short to be Australian. Basically, kind of going on from Nathan's thing about ego, how do you have a go-to way to protect the prospect's ego, but yet find out who's the real decision makers behind the things? A lot of people, like if you ask too directly, they'll go, "Oh no, I'm the decision maker. I'm the sole decision maker." Until you get to, okay, sign here. "Oh no, I have to go to X, Y, and Z to get that signed." So you kind of have to protect their ego to kind of move the deal a little bit. You have to massage it, but at the same time, you need to get to the bottom of who's actually pulling the strings.
That's a great question, and it's a real opportunity if you think about it in the right way, because if you're good at what you do in the sales kind of founder kind of consultant role that you're in, what you'll recognize is, hey, that person that you're selling to or working with hopefully they'll recognize that. And what you can do is say, listen, how do we do this? How do we get in front of your boss, or how do we get in front of the CFO or whomever? And the thing I try and do is convey that, hey, I'm in this to make you look good, right? So I want us to go in together. You found us as a company. You're coming to the senior executives or whomever with a solution, and that should be rewarded and recognized, as opposed to diminishing their role. So then what I try and do at that point is, how do we craft this solution so that it's the best thing for the company? And I will go so far as to say, I'll even say something in front of in senior management where I go, he and I were grinding it out about price, and we're like, so I make them look like I recognize that they did a bunch of negotiating and they pushed back and to get a better deal or whatever the thing is. But basically I view them as we're partners in this. And if it's a complicated sale and a complicated solution, you invariably are, right? Partners, because any of these deals are not done the minute you get the contract signed. You got to implement, they got to be successful. If it's not successful, and this goes into the message too, is, hey, listen, this is not a win for us if you're not successful, because you end up being a pain in the ass customer. We can't use you as a reference. You require extra support that we don't want to, that's suboptimal. Those sorts of things those are outcomes we don't want to have happen. So we need this to be successful. You're integral to this. You're going to be our kind of go-to person. And so how do we make that happen? I don't know. I hope that helps.
Yeah. Struth. It's great.
Yeah. It works. It does. It really works. And it can be disarming. And if you go in behaving like someone who's really a consultant and the kind of person that is prepared to say, hey, I don't think we can fit, or I don't see how this is going to work, then one of two things happens. They either agree with you, which is a win, or or you've not done a very good job of communicating your value, or they turn around and say, no, here, we can help you, here, or we can make this work. Here's what we can do. And then they're on the same side of the table with you, trying to figure out how to solve the problem.
Good stuff, great. Brendan. Thanks.
Yeah, great counsel. Thanks, Brendan, Paul. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And if the group has any questions, please feel free to reach out to Brendan. And thanks for your time today. Look forward to seeing everybody next week. And Brendan, thanks again for sharing your knowledge. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. Taylor, it was fun. Thanks to everyone for attending. And ping me if you want the slides, or I don't know, however you get the slides. And then and if you want to connect me with me, LinkedIn, do that too. All right. Thanks, awesome, folks.
Thanks so much. We'll see you all later.